I'm curious as to your opinion about the Bahir and other Kabbalistic traditions that stem from.
Can we say for Habahir?
Yes, if it given that we even secular people that did it at very least to Guianic era Babylon.
Uh, from what I've heard, considered pseudepigrapha. It claims to have been written by a Tana.
When you say Gaonim, this could be between 7th, 8th, 9th, or 10th century. Regardless, post any Tanaim. I think it's partially attributed to Nechonya ben Akana, the student of Yochanan ben Zakkai. So now Yochanan ben Zakkai, this is already in the time of Rabbi Akiva. But again, there's no proof for this. But even if there was proof, since when did our sages have the authority to establish anything metaphysical? So, he just carries the weight of Midrash, Agadah. I'm not sure what the question is.
My question is, you've said in at very least videos that you see reincarnation and the overall, what's the word for it? You've said that beliefs in one's conception of God and one's conception of the world and one's conception of one's worldview should only be based in Torah, and that other non-Torah sources cannot describe things like God. Correct me if I'm wrong on that.
I said anything metaphysical, like for it to be
metaphysical, yes.
Right.
Right, if something claims to be metaphysically true and obligatory to believe from a metaphysical perspective, it has to stem from Torah Shebiktav.
So what about the Talmud mentions that there is a Kabbalistic tradition. What that is, we don't know. Although one could attribute it to things like the Bahir or the chariot works.
Right. Masa Bereshit and Masa Merkava.
No, the Rambam says this also. I mean, the Rambam in Moreh Nevuchim says that there was a mystical tradition, but he says that he never received it. But that doesn't change anything. I mean, what's the difference? There's traditions floating around that aren't verified, that are technically not set in stone. They're not bound for you to believe it.
Now, don't get me wrong. I don't see an issue with people studying Sefer HaBahir, whether they believe it was written by Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai, or like the others who claim that it was written by Rabbi Nechonya ben Akana. That's fine, but it's fine for you. In other words, you can't hold another Jew accountable for not wanting to believe, to follow, to build their hashkafa off of that book. And that's a problem we have in the Jewish world today. That people get convinced of a certain book, they automatically lump it in with words like Masorah, Torah Sheba'al Peh. Now suddenly this book that we knew nothing about till about 1,000 years ago was now also given on Har Sinai alongside the Taryag Mitzvot. So I think the issue people have is with that word Masorah. We have a tradition, a mystical tradition, making people think that because there's Masorah, there's tradition, that there's automatically transmission all the way back to Har Sinai. In other words, it's optional to believe. But the thing is, people don't want to study anything having to do with mysticism if they also have to believe that it's optional to believe. In other words, people want to believe so bad that they convince themselves that it's not just a reshut, it's a chovah to accept it. It's obligatory on all Jews. Why? Just because they found it special and meaningful to themselves.
For example, I'm of the opinion that Techiyat HaMeitim was one of these beliefs, and that the Rambam didn't even believe it himself and was forced to in some way write a whole apology on why didn't he mention in Sefer HaMitzvot or in Mishneh Torah, if it was so tied into Judaism. Only because there's a Kabbalistic tradition. And it's not Kabbalistic tradition. I mean, the whole notion of Kabbalah is a much later statement. I mean, Kabbalah just means transmission, but I guess a mystical tradition doesn't mean that it was a tradition passed down from Har Sinai. It's a mystical tradition. For something to be authoritative, bound on every Jew to believe, in terms of halakha, it has to be reiterated by the Bedin HaGadol. In terms of anything metaphysical, it has to be from the Chumash. Now, clearly, the rabbis in the Talmud, or many of them, would disagree with me. It says if someone doesn't believe in Techiyat HaMeitim, it says that they won't partake in it. They won't partake in the resurrection of the dead. Okay, fine. Being that the Torah doesn't mention it, then who cares? It's like someone saying that if I don't believe in JC, I'm going to go to hell. Well, the Torah doesn't mention the notion of the Messiah, and the Torah doesn't mention the notion of hell either. So I wouldn't consider that adding to the Torah. Someone basically builds a house, puts you in it, and then knocks it down. I don't see it changing anything in terms of making someone a good Jew or a bad Jew. But if there was a mystical tradition, how is that applied to anything that we do in everyday Jewish life? I mean, does the Rambam mention anything?
Not necessarily saying in halacha. I'm just more saying
in practice.
That's a good question. I would say meditation.
In terms of what the Rambam actually mentioned, because he would have known something. I mean, there's people like Ariel Bar-Sadok has an article on how the Rambam was a Kabbalist. Most Kabbalists believe the Rambam was a Kabbalist. It's funny. The Arizal writes, or his student wrote, that the Rambam wasn't completing his learning because he didn't have the Zohar. Like most people who don't know that statement of the Arizal, feel like, of course the Rambam had the Zohar. He just kept it in secret. Even that statement itself is optional to believe. Any statement amongst Chazal that is not of a legal nature is considered Agadah, what's later called Midrash.
Or how it's correctly called Midrashe Agadah. So you have Midrashe Agadah versus Midrashe Halacha. What's Midrashe Halacha? Sforim like the Sefra, the Sefri, the Mechilta. But regardless, any type of Agadah is optional to believe.
Now, I'm not saying that they're completely disposable. I mean, some are, but the bulk of them are there to introduce halachot. It says in Hilchot Sanhedrin that the halachot were developed by vote, that the court would vote laws into existence. I mean, how can they vote something metaphysical into existence? Like my old line, if that was the case, they would vote that the Messiah should come tomorrow or that our enemies would be drowned in the sea. So in terms of what's called Torah Sheba'al Peh, is just the legal rulings of the court. And that's the only thing that a Jew is obligated to keep outside of the 5 books of Moses. I'm not sure like if Rabbi David Bar Chaim holds like this also. I mean, I had a discussion with him, but in the discussion, I got him to admit how he actually feels about the Zohar. Because it seems like he's been dancing around the issue.
No, he hasn't.
On his videos, he has one video that he finds a letter of one of the students of Rav Kook in a book. I know that he doesn't believe in the Zohar. In my discussion, he said that he didn't believe in the Zohar. But him and Michael Baron online in the public sphere, have danced around it a little bit because they have to live in Israel, right? In Israel, they'll burn your house down if they find out that you don't believe in the Zohar. They really, unless you're really in a Temani community, like there's a synagogue of Dor Daim, like near Ramat Eshkol, and there's like a little Yemenite Baladi community there. But in most religious sections of Israel, they'll kick your kids out of the school. It's very hard for people who don't believe that the Zohar is not written by the Rashbi.